That's her claim. And
Lie. It's an absolute lie.
Yeah, I mean, and obviously, I'll hopefully talk to Paul as well, Paul Elam. She's claiming that the funds went straight to a Voice for Men.
That's shocking. That's actually libelous.
This video is part of a series where I shall be fact-checking a number of very serious claims that Laura Bates has made about the men's human rights movements in her book, Men Who Hate Women. And to do this most effectively, I will be taking the time to talk to some of the people that Laura Bates repeatedly talks about in a manner that I would describe as wholly inconsistent with at least 9 of the 12 National Union of Journalists' core principles. And in this video, I'm examining a number of claims that Laura Bates has made about Paul Elam, who among other things is the creator and curator of probably the world's largest and most influential men's rights website, A Voice for Men. Most particularly, I'm examining her claim that in 2014, Elam set up a fake website which almost exactly duplicated the site of a charity called White Ribbon Australia, and then intentionally and illegally diverted donations intended for a domestic abuse charity directly to A Voice for Men. If true, it would of course be an extremely serious allegation, not only because, as Bates observes in her book, such a suggestion has the potential to both damage and smear the image of the wider men's movement, but also because, as Bates fails to mention, but Wikipedia will confirm, the website in question was and still is owned by Erin Pizzey, the mother of the women's refuge movement, and consequently Laura Bates's malicious, mendacious, mean girl scuttlebutt also extends to her. I will be discussing Bates's outrageous claim directly with Erin Pizzey in a follow-up video, but first I invite you to consider the response from her primary target, Paul Elam, who also kindly took the time to talk to me about a number of additional claims that she makes about him in her book. Okay, Paul, thank you very much for your time. Essentially, I just want to ask you, as I've said, kind of what I'm really trying to do is take the time to talk to the people that Laura Bates talks about in her book, but hasn't clearly taken the time to, or kind of really the decency to, given the, kind of some of the things that she some of the inferences to some of the things she says about people.
It's the feminist way, writing about people but don't talk to them.
She accuses you of fraud, which I think is probably the most significant one. She accuses you of not caring about and exploiting the men who read and interact with you on Voice for Men. She accuses you of saying all sorts of despicable and reprehensible things about women. She accuses you of being a gateway drug to, amongst other things, white supremacy and domestic terrorism. And if I've read her inference correctly, I think she also suggests or kind of describes you as being, and I quote, a truck driver. So how would you respond to these allegations?
Well, she left out the part that I eat kittens for breakfast.
Okay.
Blame on her for that. That was pretty negligent on her part. Some of this stuff, I mean, I'm happy to respond to any of it for the satisfactions of the men's rights audience, the red pill audience. I'm fine with all that. A lot of this stuff, how do you respond to her saying, I don't care about men?
Sure.
What can I say? Yes, I do. Of course, I've spent 35 years off and on, but for the most part, 35 years in helping professions. A lot of that work has been dedicated toward helping men who are in trouble. If she wants to infer from that, the fact that, and I did read some of the snippets of what her allegations were based on, and it largely reflected that I held men to account for their decisions, which I still do. I always will. I never wanted to be a part of a movement of another victim identity for the world to deal with. I think that most men's rights issues can be prevented with good decisions from men. For instance, I support the idea of men not becoming legally vulnerable to the state through marriage. And I hold men to account to that. That, you know, if you invite the state into your bedroom and living room, if you invite the state into your life by allowing them to license you as a married person and then have jurisdiction over your life and your children when you're done, if you look at the way that system is and decide you want to get married and then you end up burned from it, then indeed, I have little sympathy for you. This is something that men could prevent by not bringing on themselves. The fact that I hold fast to that, I think, is an alien language to the likes of Laura Bates, because she is part of an ideology where everybody's a victim. And this is the only way that feminism prescribes looking at people. They even say, you know, patriarchy hurts men too, because we're all victims. It's nonsense. There are no victims, just volunteers. And I think that is a much healthier way to approach helping men, by calling them to account for their decisions, for their behavior, for what they do in life. And if she interprets that as not caring about men, to me, it only reflects a reflection of what a fraud she is as any kind of an advocate for human beings. Because without accountability, we're all sunk, which is why feminists are so miserable.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that has kind of struck me throughout the book, and not remotely just in the men's rights activist chapter, is as many people have observed, Bates as a feminist and other feminists have a tendency to kind of project, and so much of kind of what she accuses the men in this book of being, at the very least, it's not unreasonable to, you know, throw back exactly the same, you know, kind of suggestion or inference. Clearly, she's an ideologue. Clearly, she is, after all, possibly, you know, one of the world's most famous and successful keyboard warriors through her Everyday Sexism project. And one of the things, I mean, before we get to the actual fraud allegation, one thing that sort of she puts at kind of most of the men in this book, and she certainly directly puts it at you, is that you make money in talking about what you do and doing what you do.
You mean like she does?
Like she does, yes. Exactly.
Oh my God! Call out the fraud police. My God, I've got a donate button on my website. Oh, Lord forbid. Nobody's ever done that before.
So we'll conclude on the sort of what she says in chapter 7, because it's very much about sort of that aspect, and about you know, ironically, she accuses you of turning or kind of encouraging men to be victims, because then they won't crawl out of the cesspit of the manosphere. But first of all, I mean, the key allegation I want to address is the white ribbon allegation, because that is, I mean, essentially, I talked to Erin Pizzey last week, and I had interviewed her kind of about, you know, just about other stuff kind of quite recently, and she had just in passing mentioned about a white ribbon website lawsuit that, you know, she was involved in. And then I read Bates's book. And
of course, when you want to paint a narrative of dangerous men, particularly of men who are dangerous to women, which is what Laura Bates is in the business of doing, is characterizing any dissenters from her ideology as an actual physical threat to women in general. This is nothing new. You know, Daily Cost was doing this a long time ago. As a matter of fact, you know, Laura Bates lifted her fraud charges directly from David Futrell, who did a huge expose years ago, wrote a nice lengthy article about how I had pocketed donations to my website. As though this is a guy with a donation button on his website, and I assume he is not, whoever's donating to his cause, he's not turning around and giving the money to starving children. He is keeping it to compensate himself for his time and effort in doing a blog the same way I do, and other expenses that come. I mean, at one time, ABFM was in the top 30,000 websites across the world, had massive traffic. And we required dedicated servers for that. So there's a lot of expenses that go into it. And yes, God forbid, I compensate myself for my time. I think I worked out once that if I paid myself hourly over the last 10 years, I make 35, 36 cents an hour. So if they want to call that fraud, that's fine. No problem.
Yeah, no, I mean, it certainly it certainly seems rich from probably the foremost person in a quite a large army of professional full-time feminists, and that's very much what Laura Bates is, and kind of her narrative for wanting to write this book is actually quite curious, because it's not a case of, well, gosh, what's going to shift a lot of paper, but that she, until recently, because of lockdown, had been visiting at least 2 schools up and down the UK every week, and she's been doing this for a number of years, presumably not just out of the goodness of her heart, and certainly walking her books.
She's part of a multi-billion-dollar movement. I mean, the very idea of a feminist writing about nefarious funding in the men's rights movement. They did that with Cassie J's movie too. They tried to cast aspersions on the sources of the income when it was in fact funded by hundreds and hundreds of free speech advocates who wanted to see that movie produced. But the idea of a feminist questioning funding, my God, the hypocrisy in that is staggering. But then again, it's staggering, but it's not surprising, because this is what we've seen from them for 50 years. This is a poor little me, poor little rich girl. I'm under threat from this evil man all the way across the pond, sitting there at a keyboard. What can I say?
Yeah, well, I suppose the one thing I can say is that it probably looks better to her readers to accuse you of trying to steal White Ribbon's funding or donations than it does to accuse the essentially the mother of the women's refuge movement, which is by association what she has done. And as you say, I mean, kind of. But as I said, I would have been very surprised if any of this sort of allegations or comments that she's made are new to you. They most of the kind of claims that she makes are picked from other people's commentary over the years.
Let me interject something about this. I want to speak to the White Ribbon matter for a couple of moments here.
Yeah.
The allegation I got from reading the little snippets, by the way, thank you for reading her book, so I didn't have to. I read the pages that you sent me. So
I figured somebody had to do it.
Yeah, somebody had to do it. I'm glad it was you and not me. No, the allegation was that we imitated White Ribbon, Australia, or the White Ribbon Foundation in order to take donations that were actually intended for the feminist organization White Ribbon.
Yeah.
One, we never collected a single dime through that effort. But but before we even really get to that, let's talk about what the website was about to begin with.
Please,
the website, as is stated at the near the top of the page in a prominent place on the right-hand side, identified what Ribbon.org, our website, was about, that it was not to be confused with any other. It was clearly stated that we were not White Ribbon right there. All the articles, and we ran articles on that website. Aaron ran articles on that website, which exposed the con game going on from the Australian White Ribbon organization, the way they were collecting money, the fact that they were basically raking in millions of dollars and then paying themselves lavish salaries on top of it. It's interesting, what they accuse you of as often turns out to be what they're doing.
Yeah.
Well, that's what the White Ribbon organization was, and they eventually got exposed as frauds and finally went bankrupt, either through mismanagement of the funds or because we cost them support, which I was happy to do. But we stated clearly what we were about, that we were about exposing the White Ribbon organization. We exposed their finances. We published articles from Aaron, a lot of other people denouncing what they were doing. You would have to be unbelievably, you would have to be functionally, mentally handicapped to come on that site and not know what we were doing. Again, and on top of that, there was never a dime that changed hands over this. Aaron never got a penny. A Voice for Men never got a penny. It never happened. So the allegation that we were doing this is totally fraudulent. Laura Bates knows that. I'm sure she scoured our, which is now called Honest Ribbon. I'm sure she scoured that site looking for anything she could to present in her book. And the reason you won't see any kind of tangible, real proof of anything is because it doesn't exist.
To be honest, I think it's quite generous to Laura Bates, because I think she just kind of, read a 5-year-old Cosmopolitan article and took that at its word. I'll leave some links for people watching this. I'll leave some links about the White Ribbon Australia, because I know that they did fall into difficulty about how they were spending their money and basically everything that you're being accused of.
That was the point of that website. It was to attract people using the White Ribbon name. Absolutely. Anybody want to claim we're guilty of that? Yes, we're guilty of that. We absolutely went out there with the White Ribbon name to get people to read about the real White Ribbon, what they were really doing, not their PR stuff that they sent out there to the world all the time. And sure enough, it had an impact. They're gone now, and guess what? We're here.
Okay, yeah.
Well, I'm sure that pisses Laura Bates off to no end.
Presumably. Yeah, and kind of, I haven't, some of the claims she's made about you, I'm familiar with. The kind of Basha, Violent Bitch Month or something like that. Obviously.
I'll just send people to the Red Pill movie. If they want an explanation of that, they can get that there. God, Laura, please, come on, keep it in this century, would you?
Well, that's it exactly. So it was, I kind of figured the literal sort of allegation of fraud, I kind of figured was the kind of the most significant one. So I haven't had time to, kind of look at everything, but I'd also say that, the Wayback Machine archive is there. So, kind of older pages of A Voice for Men, because I did sort of certainly look for, kind of White Ribbon and Honest Ribbon, in terms of, kind of 2015 or whatever, when this was all sort of going on. So that's there for people, kind of, if they want to make their own minds up.
We've been talking about White Ribbon and working on exposing them for years.
Yeah.
And of course, I doubt if Laura Bates really mentioned any of the context around all this work at all. She wanted to draw people's attention to money.
Yeah, and as I said, I thought it was extremely significant that she had absolutely nothing to say about Aaron Pizzey, who, kind of was very much involved in that, is very much involved in the men's rights, human rights movement, and is a significant figure in the women's movement and the women's refuge movement. So, you know, I thought that was significant.
And she's a hero to the people in the men's movement, an absolute legend.
Yeah, and I told her when I interviewed her, you know, kind of she was #1 on my list of people of all time that I wanted to talk to, literally because kind of, I suppose my red pill experience was very much kind of understanding the infrastructure and the barriers to help and support for domestic violence victims, I would say of all sexes, in different ways, and the implications of that. And kind of for somebody of Erin's stature to be saying the same thing, you know, helped me to confirm what I was thinking. You know, so that you know, something like that cannot be underestimated. One last thing on the white ribbon. So kind of because ultimately it ended up in a lawsuit, and Erin talked about that briefly. About the name, the domain name.
It wasn't an actual lawsuit. What it was is, I think the organization is called ICANN. They're the governing body worldwide for domain names.
Okay. So it's more of a
yes,
tribunal or something like that.
And they did rule against us for the use of the domain. Not for anything else, just saying that was by rights that the domain should belong to the White Ribbon organization. We were fine with that, mostly expected it. I know that our tactics were provocative, but in terms of money changing hands or things like that, this is where Laura Bates is just a liar.
Yeah. Okay, no, look, that's very helpful. Again, the sort of provocative activism that feminists have been involved in over the years is, you know, I think pretty legendary. I can think of, particularly in England, over recent times, you have Sisters on Cuts who do kind of direct action in London in relation to how they view the domestic violence sector should be serviced and run. So to suggest that, well, you know, I just to suggest that simply by doing that tactic of using that name to then debate the narrative about domestic violence and
to be fair to us, I mean, again, I understand ICANN's ruling on it, and it doesn't bother me. But the fact of the matter remains that domain was available.
Yeah.
They had not bothered to secure it. We set up the site. The original White Ribbon Foundation was a foundation predicated on the idea that only men commit domestic violence, only women are victims of it. They were pushing that narrative into grade schools across Australia and other countries. And we saw the domain was available, got it, and actually, you know, one of our supporters gave it to us. And we used it to draw attention to the corruption and fraud of that organization, for which I will never apologize or have any sense of wrongdoing in that. We accepted the decision on it, no problem. We could have probably sued and maybe had a different outcome. Wasn't worth it to us. The damage to White Ribbon Foundation had been done, which is what we intended to do to begin with.
I don't know, as I say, I'm going to sort of move to chapter 7 in a minute, because that's where she kind of gets into, again, particularly about your view of men and men who, you know, kind of read Voice for Men, for example. And I thought that was kind of be useful to kind of tease that out a little bit. But is there anything you want to say about the kind of various claims that she makes in the main chapter, the men's rights activist chapter? As I say, kind of, I'm not familiar with them all, but I'm kind of presuming that if the Bash a Violent Bitch month, which is the first one she uses, is anything to go by, there's going to be a lot of plucking words from context, and also an element of kind of passive passive aggressive pearl clutching in terms of that. The reality is that Paul Elam and many men use robust language in a way that Laura Bates may not be comfortable with. But you know,
and all I can say about that is imagine my concern.
Yep.
The fact of the matter is that, oh gosh, what has Laura done here? She's trying to make a parallel between men who act out violently and mass murderers, those sort of things. She's trying to connect that in some way to the men's movement. It's a total failure. But I mean, looking at let's do the Bash a Violent Bitch month. By the way, I'd like to remind your viewers and mine that October next month is Bash a Violent Bitch month. And we will be marking that month with the appropriate content on A Voice for Men. Bash a Violent Bitch month, I wrote 10 years ago in response to a Jezebel article. I mean, most people have heard this story, but for the few who haven't, let's fill them in. There was an article on Jezebel.com, the I think flagship feminist website, called "Have You Ever Beat Your Boyfriend Up?" Because we have.
Yeah.
And they went into this long description of all the women around Jezebel, both readers and editors of the site, that were bragging about the physical damage they had inflicted on their male partners. Yeah. And concluding that, well, all we can say is, in looking at this, that and what we conclude is that you better not fuck with us. The arrogant, abusive, arrogant attitude that came with this, the joy they were taking about bashing guys, breaking their noses, slapping the glasses off their face, throwing their laptop across the living room, glorifying all this. So I said, well, there's a great opportunity right here. Why don't we just reverse the gender and see how this sounds to people? And I didn't even even in the parody, I didn't do a complete parody of them, because I set it up that we were talking about responses to women who behaved that way. So what if we hit you back? How do you like that? And of course, in a gynocentric society, that outrages some people. They think, oh my God, no matter what, you can never hit a woman. Guess what? I'm asserting here to this day that you certainly can defend yourself. Everybody has a human right to self-defense. That's my firm belief. That includes men who are being abused by violent women. So what we point out every October, when the feminists are out there raising their hundreds of millions of dollars in the name of domestic violence protection for women, I want to use that time to remind people of two things. One, that women aren't the only victims of domestic violence.
Yeah.
And that two, men do have a right, so do women. Everybody has a right to defend themselves from physical assault. And if you can't handle that, what can I say? You know, write your congressman, take it up with God. I don't care. But that's the Bash a Violent Bitch month is portrayed by Bates and 1,000 other feminists as this absolute call to violence for men against women in general, which of course anybody that reads it knows it's not.
Yeah, yeah. And that, I mean, you know, kind of, I guess sort of, you know, that sort of behavior is actually kind of one of the reasons I got involved in doing, you know, kind of my little project, was kind of realizing just how outrageously out of context people are prepared to kind of throw these things out. One of the things I try to kind of document in the Glass Blind Spot is the kind of the more just ridiculous claims, the more easily debunkable claims, because it never ceases to amaze me, A, that adults keep doing it in the 21st century, but that they get away with it so much. So, you know, kind of that's why I do what I do, I guess. And one of the things I did was, obviously I didn't kind of go into every single kind of thing that Bates has said. In my main review, I kind of went after sort of just two subjects, which I think are kind of core to her argument. one being the incels, and the second being that young men have a 0.0002% chance of experiencing a false allegation of rape or domestic abuse in their lifetime, which clearly is a little ambitious or hopeful.
Of course, that's true.
Yeah.
And there's some research somewhere to support that, conducted by feminists.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And the great William Collins assisted me in tearing that apart. And one of the things I did was I looked at the first quote on the first page of her book, because it's kind of quite a dramatic quote. And it's in my review, but basically it's not everything that it appears to first be, put it that way. So in the same way, I want to address the quote that she begins chapter 7, men who exploit other men, because it's a quote from you, and I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on it, and also kind of if there's any context that has perhaps been plucked from it. So the quote is, "Tough shit, go fucking bother someone else with your problems." Paul Elam, MRA, in a post titled "An Open Response to Troubled Men." So any comment on that?
Absolutely, and I'll still stand by those words. Let me just sort of draw the context here for what my experience is as somebody that's a prominent person in this movement. I get a lot of people, and they're wrong, interpret me as somebody that's the leader or the person with answers. And I get emails from men all the time, and they all share certain characteristics. They were men who, like, married borderline women or something to that effect, ignored warning signs, got into trouble, men who I'd never heard of in terms of supporting men's issues. These were not men that had, ever come to me as advocates for men or anything like that. Getting emails saying, "Would you please drop everything you're doing and dedicate your organization to defending me against my borderline wife or my borderline ex?" And those emails come in still to this day, regularly come in. So these are guys that never heard of any problem, never saw a problem. But I also know something else. If you're a man with even a single gray hair or whisker on your face, you know several men who have been through the ringer of family courts. You know men who have suffered from these things. And what men tend to do, honestly, is as long as it's not them, it's not a problem. That describes most men. And I would get even demanding letters from men saying, "You must take this case. You must do something about it. You're the guy that can do something." And what in writing about that, I put the onus back on those men. I'll do it to this day. The world shouldn't stop because you made a series of bad decisions. You should do what you can. Now, keep in mind, I say this in the context that ABFM has helped a good many of these men. We have taken cases. We got a family court judge to recuse herself from a case because we exposed her bias in West Virginia. We had ultimately played a big role in getting a prosecutor law license suspended in Maine for her nefarious activities. We engage in a lot of activism, and we help a lot of men. And even now with the Regarding Men project, we've got hundreds of men now that are coming to groups daily that we are offering help to. They're facilitated by myself, by people like Tom Golden, Janice Fiamingo, reaching out to men, giving them support. We do a lot of that. That letter was intended for men who walk along blindly, and it was intended for men to read before bad things happen to them. anybody that looks at what I've actually done over the past 10 years, if they can conclude that I don't care about men, more power to them. The many, many men who support my work regularly would disagree with that. And I think they got the intent of that article too. It isn't that I don't care about men. What I care about is men waking up. And that's more important than what I could do for the guy that writes me in the email. Because you know what, with those guys, there's nothing I can do for them anyway. Once the system has turned on them, very little you can do. So I encourage men to think about that, to think about heading off these problems before they happen. And I have no apologies for that. And I don't think anybody who has any intellectual integrity at all will look at what I wrote in that article and what I've done over the past 10 years and conclude that I don't care about men.
Yeah. No, thank you. But I know certainly at the Chicago International Conference last year, there, you had so many people, men and women, had so much respect for you and, kind of talked about you in great esteem whenever you weren't there. So I think that says something. I don't know if you remember, I did a brief interview with you and I asked you a question that's kind of it's sort of the key one that kind of feminists tend to throw at men's rights activists. And it's one that obviously Laura Bates throws at the start of the chapter, which is the old chestnut that men's rights activists don't do anything to help men. And you answered, I thought you answered that very eloquently. But certainly kind of, one of the things I then asked was, because it's been a struggle for me personally, certainly, is that one of the sort of potential dangers of the kind of men's human rights movement is that it's the final piece in the puzzle of identity politics where we all become victims. And that was certainly something that struck me in your answer.
And I have thought from the day I started doing this, I have fought to do everything I can to make sure that that does not happen. This is why you get sometimes really terse posts from me about men and their responsibilities toward themselves and their responsibilities toward each other. I don't want to be a part of a victim movement. I want nothing to do with it. I don't think that has served women well at all. Matter of fact, I think it's led women right into a brick wall. And you look at the surveys on women's happiness, they're miserable. They're absolutely miserable in Western culture. And even though they live the most privileged lives that anybody has ever lived in human history, they are absolutely miserable. So I don't think the identity politics has helped at all. I think it'd be doubly harmful for men. Men's lives are measured often by the amount of accountability that they have. That is one definite, a guy who owns his shit, owns his life, is a guy that's usually looked up to and respected. And if you're a guy that's going around all the time saying, women are doing this to me, the world's doing this to me, we need to change the world so it won't make me feel bad. My God, that is just, that's what feminism has done for women, and I want no part of it.
Yeah, and I can relate to that. My, kind of just personal philosophical journey, a landmark observation or kind of understanding for myself becoming an adult was nobody owes me a living or nobody owes me anything, and I have to take responsibility for my actions. So
guess what, that's healthy, that's mental health in a nutshell right there. And it's exactly why that some of the stuff Laura thinks she's exposing about me. I didn't hide those writings. They were put out there in front of the whole world to see. So if my audience, didn't miss those things, they ended up concluding differently than Laura Bates. And maybe there's a reason for that.
I think certainly one of the reasons is that they probably read the entire article, would be definitely one of them. Paul, listen, thank you very much Is there anything else you would like to comment either on anything that Laura Bates has said about you, or kind of more broadly about the kind of smear that she's casting on the men's human rights movement?
Well, I can get 2 for 1 here. I can comment along those lines, and I can also throw in a shameless plug for Regarding Men.
Yeah.
If people want to see what my work is about, really, if they want to measure it for themselves and see me actually doing my work, which is also possible, come to regardingmen.com. We have set up with Tom Golden, Janice Fiamingo, and myself, we have set up a platform. We're doing groups every day of the week to men across the world. And we have men coming in from everywhere. And these groups are large and robust and active, and men are connecting to each other. They are connecting to themselves. They're sorting out the red pill rage and red pill isolation and all the stuff that comes with that, finding their place in the world and finding a connection with each other. It's the best measure of anything that we actively do is look at the fact that we do reach out to men, and we reach out very hard, and we put a lot of hours and work into giving men an environment where they can talk honestly about their lived experience and seek solutions from each other without becoming a victim. Regardingmen.com, come check it out, see for yourself what's actually going on here. Or you can just read the words of, another feminist book with another stack of feminist bullshit in it and make your decisions from that. But I invite you, if you want to know me, want to know what I'm doing, come watch me work. You've got the opportunity.
Can't you see it too? There's an elephant in the room.